Welcome to Fresh Outlook This Week. I'm Mia Toschi. We have a busy show this week. We'll continue our discussions about the George Zimmerman trial. This weekend, there are more than 100 vigils and demonstrations being held across the country for Trayvon Martin, the teen who was shot and killed. How does the country heal in the wake of the not guilty verdict? Then we'll take a look at the wrongfully convicted. Thanks to DNA testing that is more sophisticated, there are many prisoners in the U.S. who may be innocent. We'll talk about the process of being exonerated. And we'll wrap things up with a discussion on Detroit. The once thriving Midwest metropolis owes $18 billion and has filed for bankruptcy. What does this mean for the city, and what does it mean for the country? Let's begin by welcoming our wonderful panel. We have Dr. Bart Rossi, a political psychologist. We welcome you back to the show. We have John Paitakes from Seton Hall University and criminal justice expert Donald Tibbs, a professor of law at Drexel University. Welcome to Fresh Outlook, gentlemen. Very nice to have all of you here this week. Now, our first subject is, of course, the George Zimmerman case. Today and this weekend, civil rights activists and Trayvon Martin's family are attending vigils this weekend, calling on the Justice Department to ramp up its investigation into the George Zimmerman trial. Let's have a look at the latest news.
We, the jury, find George Zimmerman not guilty.
In the hours after the George Zimmerman trial verdict was released, both the defense and prosecuting attorneys answered questions about the trial. Prosecutors said they were disappointed but accepted the decision.
I am disappointed, as we are with the verdict, but we accept it. We live in a great country that has a great criminal justice system. It is not perfect, but it's the best in the world, and we respect the jury's verdict.
Zimmerman's defense team expressed their disbelief in the prosecution's case.
I think the prosecution of George Zimmerman was disgraceful. I am gratified by the jury's verdict, as happy as I am for George Zimmerman. I'm thrilled that this jury kept this tragedy from becoming a travesty. For that, we are eternally grateful.
One of Zimmerman's lawyers, Mark O'Mara, said that the case had become a civil rights event and that Zimmerman had been made a scapegoat.
Obviously, we are ecstatic with the results. George Zimmerman was never guilty of anything except protecting himself in self-defense.
So what's next for George Zimmerman? With the state criminal case over, George Zimmerman could now face new criminal charges. The federal government could file a civil rights suit, accusing him of violating 17-year-old Martin's civil rights.
Clearly, there are grounds for civil rights charges here. The mother and father of Trayvon Martin and I, with their lawyers, met with the U.S. Attorney in Florida the day I went down to organize the first national rally there. And we always said there would be a plan B, but there needed to be a plan A.
Well, certainly the most talked about subject probably this week. Gentlemen, I want to first start off by just asking you about your personal feelings on this verdict. I'm going to start off with you, Dr. Rossi.
Well, I was wrong. I thought Zimmerman's behavior would translate into manslaughter. I thought the following with the car, the following on foot, the words he used, and how he handled himself and really precipitated the whole event would be manslaughter. But I always say personality trumps everything and behavior is the most important. I don't think the jurors looked at that. I think they looked at the altercation itself. And there we have a lot of questions. So I think that's what happened.
I want to get to that in just a minute. Professor Tibbs, what were your feelings when you heard the verdict?
Dr. Rossi, you're not wrong. This should have been a manslaughter case, very clearly. Manslaughter is just a fancy way of saying that someone committed murder without the intent to kill, but acting in a negligent manner. In this case, because George Zimmerman profiled Trayvon Martin, followed him through the neighborhood, and accosted him, that behavior ultimately led up to Trayvon Martin being shot and killed. Without George Zimmerman acting and engaging in that kind of conduct, Trayvon Martin makes it back to his house, watches the end of the basketball game, and none of us are sitting here today. That's what constitutes manslaughter. My personal reaction to the case is somewhat a little bit of dismay in terms of how our criminal justice system treats not only African American defendants, but now African American innocents. Here's a young man who's doing absolutely nothing, minding his business, walking home at night in the manner that anyone else would, going through their neighborhood, but somehow ends up fatally shot and killed, and the defendant walks away with a clean acquittal.
Thank you for those comments. And Professor Paitakes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when it goes to a jury, I worked for the court system for a lot of years. The composure of the jury and the cross-section of it has a lot to do. So if it went to a different jury or there were different jurors, you might have had different results. But again, I mean, that's our criminal justice system. You have to respect the findings of the people. They spent a lot of time, they were sequestered, you know, they spent a lot of hours going over it, and that was their interpretation. And I just wanted to comment on one thing Professor Tibbs said about Trayvon was walking through the neighborhood. Well, you're walking through the neighborhood, and a choice when somebody's following you, you have a choice, flight or fight. So he decided to get into an altercation with him. Now, Zimmerman made a mistake in that he should have stayed in his car. They told him, don't follow, stay in your car, and he didn't. So there were mistakes on both ends. Again, that doesn't mean that it shouldn't have resulted in a killing, but again, you know, the circumstances were errors on both sides, really.
Oh, obviously, this is pretty reflective of how the country is feeling right now. We've got a lot of different opinions right now. As we heard in that story, the verdict is in, and we have to respect it, and the U.S. does have the greatest judicial system in the world. But where are the loopholes? And I'm going to start off, we'll start off with that right now, with where the loopholes are and how can we improve the criminal justice system.
Well, you know, I've been involved in the criminal justice system for over 40 years. And so when I look at what's happened in the past and where we are now, we have made a lot of progress in a lot of areas. The training of our personnel. To become a law enforcement officer, now I can't speak about nationally, in New Jersey is very difficult. I teach criminal justice students, that's what I do full time. There's very few positions available and there's a lot of students applying. At a minimum, they have a college degree. The screening process in this state is very difficult. So we're getting a better caliber of people. And I think that's where it starts, better training, better education.
But in terms of the actual trial itself, what the judge allowed in for the jurors to decide and what she left out, can either you gentlemen
I think in terms of your question about the holes in the system, to answer that question, I think that there's some rules and regulations associated with the law that don't take into consideration things like this guy's behavior.
Right.
His behavior or the psychology of this case was put off to the side by the jurors and they focused on the altercation.
So they were
I
only
have a
looking at
problem
the
with
one
that.
incident.
I have problems with that. This guy should not have gotten out of his car. He was told not to follow. He was trained not to follow. See and call. He was trained see and call. He did everything opposite of what he was supposed to do.
So not just with the George Zimmerman trial, but in trials as a whole,